Welcome back to part 2 of our double episode on the Hong Kong riots of 1967. If you haven't listened to part 1, I'd go back and listen to that first. Where we left off last time, street protests and wildcat strikes had been going on for weeks, and the pro-Beijing Union Federation, the FTU, called a general strike. The response by the colonial authorities was just heavy-handed repression and violence.
According to Choi Yat-kung, I remember there was a guy who was beaten up by the police to death, and his name is Lei On. So 3 police together beat him up. And then he died in the police station. So I also have heard that when he was arrested from the Shaw studio, he was already beaten up once, and then in the police station he was already beaten up again and again, and that's why he died later. So people trying to charge the police for the violence, but then failed. The police were not prosecuted or sentenced at last. So there was a nickname for the police station in Wong Dai Sin, which was the district next to the Sanpo Gong, the factory district. So the police station in Wong Dai Sin is called Yin Wang Din, meaning the hell.
To try to persuade workers to keep up the action, the unions took the unprecedented step at that time of paying strike pay.
And according to Choi Yat-kung, during the general strike, the workers participated are actually supported by the union. The union will give out money as a living cost for these workers, so to encourage them to continue the strike. However, because the colonial government has never stopped suppressing the activities of the unions. For example, they beat up the union members, they hit a lot of people, there was a lot of violence, and all these contributed to the result that the strike didn't continue for too long.
It's difficult to find out detailed information about the strikes. For example, the Hong Kong Labour Department keeps records of numbers of strikes and strike days every year, except for 1967. But records seem to show that early on, in May, the wildcat strikes were widely supported. For example, the Times newspaper reported that on the docks 3,000 workers walked out, despite there only being about 300 communist workers, but they were also joined by the majority of non-FTU and even right-wing workers. But the general strike seems to be different. The pro-Beijing New China News Agency reported that 500,000 workers were on strike. But independent and right-wing sources paint a different picture of strikes of a few days taking place in FTU strongholds like the Star Ferry, public transport and utility companies, as well as some dockyards and textile factories, but not a lot elsewhere. Union density in manufacturing industries was low, only around 12%, and the KMT-linked unions weren't taking part in the action. Also, as far as I can tell, it appears the strikes were basically called from above by union leaderships around pretty general anti-colonialist demands. So unlike the original strike at the plastic flower factory, the strikes didn't have specific economic demands for the workers, and it seems they just didn't really take off. In terms of the street sellers' participation, government figures show around 10 to 50% of them taking part in the strikes, depending on area, but this lasted for a few days and was pretty much over by the 2nd of July. A little bit later, on the 16th of July, the Seamen's Union went on strike to try to disrupt the flow of goods to and from Hong Kong, but apparently it was not widely supported and collapsed by the end of the month. With police violence escalating and the strike falling apart, some leftists resorted to different tactics.
According to Zhang Ye, although the police used police baton to beat up the protesters in May, but usually the protesters were pretty passive. They responded passively. For example, they seldom would they fight back. The only thing they would do, they would boo the police, but they do not use any armed struggle. They do not do anything violent, and usually they will passively being arrested and then passively being charged and then imprisoned afterwards. So there was no any armed struggle by that time. However, there was a kind of tension between the leftist organizers and also normal Hong Kong people. Like after the police violence, a lot of Hong Kong people are chickened out. They really wanted to stop things from escalating. They wanted to like before, they wanted to back down and then not to respond. But the leftist organizers, union members, they were really angry about the police and they really want to escalate things. But they couldn't really do so because they do not have a lot of support. So what happened was that the leftist people, the leftists by that time, they were only doing very minimal fight back. For example, they would organize some pop-up protest. Maybe they would just show up in a place for 5 minutes and then spread some leaflets and they ran away to avoid being arrested by police. And of course, they would continue to post and to stake all those big character posters. But beside that, they didn't do anything violent or extreme or didn't do anything else. But they really have this feeling that they were suppressed, like they have a lot of anger inside, but both the colonial government and other Hong Kong people didn't want them to do anything further. So what happened and how did the whole protest and strike turned into bombing was on July. So on the 5th of July, again, the mainland China People's Daily had an article, a leading article actually. So on the article, it says, 殺人要償命，血債要用血來還. Meaning, if you kill a people, you have to repay with your own life, and blood. If there's blood, if there's blood, then you have to repay with blood, like an eye for an eye, basically meaning. So it means that if the police is killing or beating up Hong Kong workers, the article suggested that Hong Kong workers should fight back and then to an eye for an eye, make the police bleed. Yes, and that was when some armed struggle or bombing happened. On the 9th of July, at the door of Kwun Tong police station, the first bomb appeared. By that time, although we will say that there was a armed struggle, there was bombing, but you can say that the strength between the protesters and the police is there's a huge difference with it. There's a common saying by that time that the workers only have iron bars and spanners, meaning that they do not have guns. They only have very limited weapons to protect themselves.
By the time the bombs started to be planted, police had killed at least 8 workers, and the bombing campaign marked a completely new phase of the protests, and it caused mass panic.
According to Choi Yat-kang, when the riots or when the armed struggle or bombing started, people were really scared. All Hong Kong people, for example, my mom would ask me not to go out on the street unless I have to go to school. And my mom also warned me not to touch anything on the street. So, and on the other hand, my dad became very mysterious. Like he would go to places that I don't know. He would disappear for some time. And I never asked whether or not my dad was involved in any bomb making or related bomb incidents. But what I remembered was that in the 80s, one time I was walking together with my dad at Choi Wan village, and then we saw an old man, and my dad told me that, that man used to make bombs during the 67 riot. So although I never asked my dad about whether or not he made bombs, And I also remember that although there were a lot of bombs by that time, but most of the bombs are actually fake bombs. For example, I was living in Lok Fu by that time in Wang Tao Ham, and there were like 8 to 10 bombing incidents or bombing threats, but only one bomb was a real bomb, like other bombs are fake bombs.
Over the course of the events, there were around 8,000 bomb incidents, around 1,200 of which were real bombs.
According to Zhao Ye, I think the bombing phenomenon is really a symptom of what would happen if a society is suppressed and oppressed by the colonial force for too long. So at first, the bombing thing happened was a response to the crackdown on worker strike and so on. And usually these bombing organizations, there are two kinds. One is more organized and one is more spontaneous. So when I say some of them are organized, I mean they have an organization background. For example, some of them may be a part of the union or they are union members and they are on a strike. And because they have nothing to do at home and they're receiving money as a compensation of their strike of not like earning money from the union. So they were thinking how to make use of the money. So some of them come up with this idea of making a bomb. So another kind of organization are more spontaneous, self-motivated, I would say. So here I think it is again related to or influenced by the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So by that time, Lin Biao, from one of the revolutionary leaders in China, published an article says 人民戰爭勝利萬歲, meaning people's war will win forever. So in that article, it has a sentence, 人自為戰,村自為戰, meaning people are going to fight for their own and then a village is going to defend themselves. So this article's main purpose of this article is to motivate people and then to tell them that you are capable of self-motivating and utilizing your own wisdom. Organize yourself so to emancipate yourself. So one doesn't need any organization to ask you to do anything. You are capable of doing it and organize something on your own by yourself. So one example that I would like to raise up is there are two persons who were sentenced by the colonial government, having a lifelong sentence because of bombing. So they have a nickname called the Bomb Maniacs. So these two famous prisoners, they were actually spontaneous, meaning that they do not have a organization background. So how did we know about that? Was because when he was arrested and was sentenced and was imprisoned, people found out that nobody went there to visit him. Like, nobody ever show up. So it was later that people found out that although he was a member of the textile union, he was not like ordered by any organization to throw bombs. He was self-motivated, spontaneous act. And of course, later people called the textile union and asked people to go visit him, but that is another story. So when those bombs were made, most of them were put at places that is related to the colonial government, meaning that they are usually the people, the one who make the bombs, usually wanted to target colonial institutes. For example, police stations and so on. But later, more bombs show up and then they were usually put at some big street conjunctures, some busy areas. So by doing so, those people were trying to stir up the society, to create some kind of social unrest feeling to make people realize that there's something wrong with the city. And when that happened, the society had very polarized reaction. Like, on the one hand, some people, usually leftists, they are very, they supported those acts. What they were thinking is that the people asked us to continue to struggle, to do something. So what should we do? Or maybe we should not just sit at home waiting for something to happen on us mysteriously, or we have to fight for it on our own and self-motivate ourselves, be spontaneous. So they came up with this idea that they have to stop the traffic, interrupt people from their daily routine. Especially they will try to obstruct the traffic during busy hours when people have to go to school or day after work, something like that. And of course, a lot of people were affected by these bombs. And with the real bombs, usually they target the colonial institutes, and some police officers and also firemen were dead or sacrificed. And of course, a little bit of some innocent people were affected by these bombs as well. According to Choi Yat-kang, I can remember that there was a bomb that was thrown from some place very high to a police van, and then it was dropped right on the police van. But this is something that I can remember. And later, because I transferred and then I went to a labor school where my classmates are from have a union background. I mean, their family had a union background. So one of my classmates actually told me that he used to make bombs during the 67 riots, but of course fake bombs. There are a lot of fake bombs by that time, actually. And on those bombs, no matter fake or real, they will have a note on it which says 偷仔菠蘿同胞勿近, meaning homemade pineapple, don't come close. Of course, in Chinese, this is to warn Chinese not to come close, but trying to... Because what they want to hurt is the white British colonial government officials. So they write a Chinese note on it, metaphoring such bomb as a homemade pineapple. And of course, there are a lot of, there are more fake bombs than real bombs. And I think maybe one of the reasons is that it's really difficult to make a real bomb, and they don't know how to make a real bomb, so they can only make a fake one.
In addition to bombs by the left, some people believe that gangsters took advantage of the chaos to settle some scores, and many other people on the left, including our interviewees, think that the KMT organised at least some false flag attacks. So bombings designed to look like the work of the left, to discredit the left.
So Choi Yat-kang asked, have you heard that there were incidents of bombing were actually done by the KMT, that the KMT was trying to frame the leftists of that time? Yes, of course, I have heard about that. So, for example, the Tsinghua Gai incident, where two kids, one sister and one brother, was killed by bombs. I think that was totally framing incident. The KMT tried to kill people or kill some leftists, and they used the leftist bombers as a scapegoat, so to avoid any suspicion. So because there's I have reason for such kind of analysis. The first was because this bombing incident happened around a leftist district. So why would a leftist bomb its own people in its own district? Usually they would target other institutes, but not like their own districts. This is my first reason for that. The second is that usually when leftists throw bombs, they would put it on some busy streets or big conjunctures, but not like that. In that case, the bomb was put on a blind alley, so there was a one-way road, and it was very quiet. Not a lot of people were walking there. So the bomb was also placed at a car. So it was suspected that the bomb was trying to hurt the owner of the car. But then because those kids were playing around the area and they unfortunately, they were playing with the bomb, and then that's why they become the target, or they were dead because of that.
The clampdown by British authorities was brutal, and tensions were extremely high. Choi believes that they were at the brink of urban guerrilla warfare.
A quick summary. I think by that time Hong Kong was in white terror already. And for example, if you go out on the street, the police can search you if they suspect you, and you don't really have to do anything. The police can search you or arrest you just because they suspect you. So there was a kind of white terror, fear feeling in Hong Kong. The atmosphere was really tense. And the second thing was that by that time, I think Hong Kong was on the edge of turning into a guerrilla fight zone. Why I'm saying was that the bombs were everywhere, and actually we call those people the struggle troop. And I often think that if the Chinese government give us guns, it will turn immediately into a guerrilla fight, and it will become something like what happened in North Ireland. But the Chinese government didn't give the leftists any weapons, and that's why it didn't really turn into a guerrilla fight. But we were really close to that, so it was a very horrible age.
By white terror, Choi means right-wing terror, like by the counter-revolutionary white forces in the Russian Civil War. But the situation did come very close to escalating. On the 8th of July, hundreds of people protesting on the Chinese side of the border, including PRC People's Militia, opened fire on Hong Kong police, killing 5 and injuring others. The police shot back, killing a militiaman, and fighting continued until British troops arrived. Leftist newspapers were banned, buildings raided, schools shut down. Activists were rounded up, jailed, or even deported to the PRC, a tactic that the British used to great effect during the uprising against colonial rule in Malaya. Royal Navy ships and helicopters were even used in some assaults. In total, around 5,000 people were arrested, and around 2,000 of those convicted and jailed, while at least 20 workers were killed by police. The leftists, they responded with more bombings, and on the 28th of August, perhaps the most well-known incident in the riots occurred: the burning to death of right-wing radio personality Lam Bun, along with his cousin.
According to Zhao Ye, back to the Lam Bun incident. So Lam Bun was presenter on a radio show. He was actually the director or producer of that radio show. So he was burned to death, into ashes actually. I mean, very severely burned and then died by those leftists by that time. So a lot of people are often debating whether or not Lam Bun should die. And I would say Lam Bun was really mean. He was a really mean person. Although the only thing he did was to commit some sort of verbal violence towards the leftists. But what he said was really hurtful to those leftists. For example, he would describe those leftists as shameless, cheap, obscene, dirty, and so on. And he did it every day. So the leftists by that time were really unhappy or had a problem with this guy. They really hated him. And the most hurtful sentence I think Lam Bun said was the sentence he said, 睇呢個紅太陽點死, meaning I will just see how the red sun dies. So the red sun is usually a metaphor of Mao Zedong. So this sentence is saying that I will see when Mao Zedong dies. So because Mao Zedong was the spiritual leader of a lot of leftists by that time. So this sentence really hurts the feeling of those people. So if you ask me if Lam Bun should die or not, I would say 出得嚟行，預咗要還, meaning if you have said something like this, and then you should have estimated or predicted your own death. Because this is how the society works. If you say something like that, you're going to receive the fruits of your own. You'll receive the consequences of your own act. So this is my response to Lam Bun's death.
So basically, that seems like the Chinese version of the British saying, chat shit, get banged, which might seem pretty harsh, but it just goes to show the level of division in Hong Kong society at the time.
Yes, my dad would say that Lam Bun is really worth dying because he's really mean and he never shuts up. And by that time, the leftists, they were really spiritually motivated by Mao and also by the Cultural Revolution in China. So the way that Lam Bun insults Cultural Revolution and Mao really make those sensitive leftists feel very hurtful.
Now, the perpetrators were never caught, despite police and radio bosses offering the biggest cash reward ever in Hong Kong history for information. And to this day, it's widely believed that Yung Kwong, chairman of the FTU and lead director of the struggle committees, ordered it. However, Choi then told us something that we were really not expecting to hear.
According to Zhao Ye, I have an exclusive news about the death of Lam Ban. So we first of all we have to understand the history of Lam Ban. So Lam Ban was a DJ from the commercial radio Hong Kong, but before he transferred to commercial radio Hong Kong. He used to be a member of Zhonglun Zhongying Gongxi, meaning the Chinese United Movie Company, something like that. So he was a student of that company. So he was trained by a company with leftist background. So he used to be a part of the leftist community. But then after he went to the commercial radio Hong Kong, he was like 180 degree like opposite. Like he became the enemy of the leftists and he condemned the leftists every day on the radio. And this really made his comrades very angry. I mean, his comrades when he was in that movie company. So one of his classmates of that training class was the murder of Lam Ban. So what he wanted to do at first was to pour gasoline on him, and he estimated that the gasoline won't make him die. It will only make him burn and scare the shit out of him. So they were estimating that after they poured gasoline over Lam Ban and they lit the fire, if Lam Ban was willing to get off of his car and then roll on the ground, he will put off the fire and then he won't die. But what happened was that Lam Ban was too scared to go out of his own car, so he was severely burned in his own seat in his own car and didn't really come out, and that's why he died. So even the murder, he didn't wanted him to die, but he was trying to hurt him, and it was a kind of a revengeful act because of the betrayal of Lam Ban of his own origin. But the murders also like admitted that they may be too extreme, like afterwards. And of course, I didn't tell this to the police, and the murder, the one who killed Lam Ban, that the classmate of Lam Ban already died after so many years. So that's why I can't tell you guys this exclusive news.
I was pretty blown away by this. Clearly, Choi didn't want to say the name of the person, presumably because they've got family members today who could suffer the consequences. So after discussing it with Lala, I decided not to push it. But I definitely had not gone into the interview expecting to basically find out details of who is responsible for one of Hong Kong's most notorious unsolved murders. In addition to Lam Ban and the 2 children mentioned earlier, at least 3 other civilians were killed in bombings, along with at least 5 police officers. With the strikes finished, the real and fake bombs causing havoc and the killing of Lam Ban increasingly polarised public opinion and turned more people against the leftists. But there were a few developments which finally led to the end of the turmoil.
According to Zhao Ye, the bombing ended was partly because there was a negotiation between the colonial government and also the leftists. So the information that I have, which I heard it from a lawyer named William Lewis, so a leftist lawyer. So he said that by that time, the colonial government contacted some leftists and said, if you guys were really were willing to put an end to those bombing incidents, bombing actions, we agree not to search your union headquarters. So if you want to say yes to this offer, you can post, for example, an article A on the newspaper. And if you refuse to accept this order, you can post article B on certain newspaper. So this is like a secret negotiation between 2 camps. So it was said that in the end of September, the leftists, they agreed to the offer and they posted the article A on the newspaper, meaning that they are willing to ask their people not to throw bombs anymore, and in return the police shall not search the union headquarters anymore. So that's why we can see after October there are less bombing events, and of course there are still some of them that indicates how a lot of, I mean, at least a portion of those bombing events are unorganized by any union from top down. According to Choi Yat-kung, I have another explanation, or the information that I've got is a different version on the question how everything ended. So because the 1st of October was the National Day of PRC, so I've heard from, for example, from the teachers of the labor school that they say because there were too many economic laws done already to Hong Kong, so let's stop the struggle for some time. So to let people have a happy national holiday. National Day, there was no holiday back then, but to let people enjoy the National Day, enjoy the celebration. So they received a notice to put down all those bombing and other strikes and other events, and to tune down the struggle, basically.
A key thing which helped definitively put an end to the bombings was the intervention of the PRC. In December, they officially ordered bombings to stop, as they'd firmed up their position on Hong Kong, which was basically that they were happy for it to stay in British hands. In fact, it only came out years later in 2007, when some of the internal divisions within the Chinese state at the time became clear. It turned out that a radical faction within the People's Liberation Army had been prepared to invade Hong Kong, but it was called off at the last minute by Premier Zhou Enlai. So, what was the legacy of the riots? Well, first off, there were a large number of prisoners.
According to Zhao Yek, I think 1971 was really the year that marks the end of the riots, or at least it marks the endeavor of the colonial government trying to wipe out all the trace that is related to the riot. So what happened in 1971 is that all the young prisoners, even those who are sentenced for more than 5 to 10 years or lifelong sentences, were released in the year of 1971. So the British colonial government was trying to end the whole incident by letting these people out to stop all the anger and all the resentment in the society. And they were really trying to do that, to hoping to gradually make such riots fade away in people's mind. So even those two bomb maniacs were released in 1971.
In addition to the armistice, British colonial authorities set about implementing a number of far-reaching reforms to alleviate the worst of the economic hardships of the working class and essentially buy off the local population.
According to Zhao Yek, if I really have to make a conclusion about 1967 riots, I think there are 3 dimensions. The first dimension is that the British colonial government now understand that they cannot oppress or only use oppression or suppressing anger as a way to rule over Hong Kong people. They have to develop like more sophisticated strategies in order to rule this place. So the second dimension is that there is a very much an increase in social benefits provided by the colonial government to Hong Kong. For example, there was the employment ordinance came out after 1967. So it was only because of the 67 that workers nowadays have more protection, legal protection. And also the government build more recreational facilities. I remember 200,000. They put quite a lot of money trying to do teenage work to make they really emphasize on the well-being of teenagers. And of course, the social security system was also more developed after the 67 riot, where poor people can now receive allowance from the government if they have economic difficulties. And all these only slowly developed after 67. And the third thing I think was a change brought by the 67 riots was that the government started to evaluate the police force because they find out that the police may be too violent sometimes, that they have too many power. I can still remember when I was young, near the Russell Street, the police can have their own casino, meaning that they break the law and then they suppose are the guardians of the law, but they break the law and then make their own illegal casinos. That was how horrible the police was back in those days. But after 67, actually in the 70s, the government evaluate the problem with excessive police power and police force. So the ICAC established. So ICAC was an independent department that is responsible for investigating any cases related to corruption. So it is to prevent, actually, for example, the police to do any corruption act. And I think this is also a fruit of the 67 riot.
Some of the key reforms implemented over the next few years included UK-style welfare benefits, including job seekers allowance, old age pensions and disability benefits, the construction of new hospitals, extensive new public housing projects, a big expansion of free compulsory education for children. Chinese was adopted as an official language in Hong Kong. Some sexist laws were dropped, like the ban on married women having permanent employment. Widespread corruption in the police, government and business was largely eradicated, other than the normal functioning of capitalism, and large amounts of green space were protected from development. The massive repression of the leftists, as well as the collapse of the general strike, had another consequence for Hong Kong's trade union movement.
According to Luan Bolong, I think after the significance or the significance of the 1967 incident or riot was that it gave birth to the independent labor movement in the 70s. So it was only because the leftist union shows that they have a problem or they are not capable. So this gives a place for the independent union, which a lot of them has a church background, to intervene in the labor scene, the society in the 70s. And this later gives rise to the independent labor movement in Hong Kong. It was all because the independent labor union, they wanted to target the leftist union. So this only could happen after 67, where the leftist union lose control over a lot of networks because of the cracking down of the colonial government.
While these reforms came about as a response to strikes, riots and bombs, and then social movements that resulted from that time, this history is generally brushed over, and credit for the improvements given to democratic reformers, as happens often with social movements.
According to Choi Yat-kang, I think what changed in Hong Kong after 67 riots was that the colonial government starts to know that they cannot only suppress Hong Kong people, but they have to find a way to govern them in a softer manner. This is a little bit like, in Malaya. I would say the leftists, they did a lot and then to push the colonial government to make Hong Kong a more livable place by forcing those colonial government to consider giving Hong Kong people some welfare. But this is because of the leftists, so we can enjoy all these nowadays. But the pro-democrats nowadays, starting from the 90s, they often say this is because of their endeavor and their work so that we can have all this. But I think this is not true. It is because of the leftists in the 67 riots. They really threatened the colonial government. And this case is so similar to Malaya, where the Communist Party and Lin Qingxiang were really helping. They were the ones who really fight against the colonial government. But it was Lee Kuan-yew and also Tong Ku who got all the credits.
That brings us to the end of our double episode on the so-called Hong Kong riots of 1967. We hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something new. As always, we've got more info on these events, photos and the like on our website, workingclasshistory.com, and linked to in the show notes. We would like to say thanks to our interviewees, to Lala for interpreting, and to our friends at Chuang for connecting us all. Chuang is a journal and blog chronicling and analysing the development of capitalism in China and working class struggles against it. So do check out their website, linked to in the show notes. It's got a lot of really interesting stuff all the time, particularly right now, about the protest movement going on against the proposed changes to their extradition laws. To our Patreon supporters, again, we want to say thank you so much for your generous support, which makes this podcast possible. You too can support this podcast for as little as $2 a month and get exclusive access to new episodes, bonus audio and more at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Also a link to that in the show notes. Catch you next time.